Yeah.
Robert's goes off, but I'll go ahead and pass the mic to Robert Buxton.
Good early evening, afternoon. Thanks for being here. I'm Robert Buxton. It's good to be back. Thanks to Hannah for having me, for setting this up. And it's going to be like I've done in the past. I'm going to play some classical piano. I'll speak about the music and maybe some gospel at the end. To start, I want to do something a little different I've been doing recently, which is improvisation. I think improvisation is it's an important thing to do because it's what they used to do in the past, in classical music at least. Somewhere along the way it fell out of favor in the classical world, and of course in jazz they improvise. But at any rate, there are different ways to do this. One is to take a tune like Happy Birthday and play it in the style of a certain composer. We could do that if you really want. Or what I was thinking is just to get 4 or 5 random notes from you, and maybe we'll do that. So, could you give me a note, please? Anybody? A, that's a good one. Okay. Couple more. You can flat and sharp them too if you like. Anybody?
C sharp.
C sharp, okay. Already nice. Couple more. B. 1 or 2 more.
G.
Okay. Let's see what happens. Any requests for what I do with it? Or quote a style? Do you want, No? Okay, so let's just see what happens. D, da, da, da. Okay, I hope I remember that, because that would be embarrassing if I forget. All right.
A, C sharp, D, G.
Just a slightly silly way to start, and that's short because the next piece I'm going to play is quite long. I think I did this over at Guilford a couple months ago. Well, if you were there, sorry if you hear it a second time, but I'm going to play Beethoven's Violin Concerto, the first movement, in Beethoven's own arrangement for piano. So I'll talk about that, why that is. Well, first of all, I'm still doing this violin theme, and the reason is, I've told you this story a million times. I'm obsessed with the violin, completely obsessed with the violin, but I'm too lazy to switch instruments. It's just too much trouble. So I'm sticking to arrangements of violin music on the piano. And the story behind this piano concerto is interesting. Beethoven wrote it in 1806, and the first performance was a disaster. The first movement alone is 25 minutes or so. So this will be the meat and potatoes of tonight anyway. After the first movement in the premiere, well, half the audience had fallen asleep. I hope you won't, I hope not. But the violinist, his name was Franz Clement, he noticed this. And speaking of improvisation, he took his violin, turned it upside down, improvised a lively country fiddle tune to wake everybody up. And then he proceeded with the second and third movements. You could imagine Beethoven was not thrilled with this spectacle. So with the advice or with the urging of his friend Muzio Clementi, he refashioned this into a piano concerto. Both versions were shelved, really, until after he died. And it was Mendelssohn and Joachim, the great Hungarian violinist, who resurrected the work in the 1830s. And to this day, the Beethoven Violin Concerto is one of the most loved, maybe the most loved violin concerto. But we have this piano version that Beethoven himself did. And technically, it's, Beethoven wrote 5 piano concertos. But this is the 6th. It's called Piano Concerto number 6, parentheses, after the violin concerto. So not to be more confusing, but what I've done is it's concertos for soloist and orchestra. Obviously, I don't have an orchestra here, so I added some of the orchestra parts into it. It's kind of my own version of Beethoven's version of, but it's confusing, but that's what it is. But I want to say a few things about Beethoven in general. First of all, this concerto, the seed from which everything grows out of is a timpani idea, which goes just like this. Just that. Bum, 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 bum. One of the main themes, it's just a scale. And this reminds me of something Leonard Bernstein said about Beethoven. He said, if you isolate any of Beethoven's musical ideas, they're not very interesting at all. They're banal. I mean, what is that by itself? I mean, it's brilliant, but it's not a melodic, beautiful, ornate thing at all. It's almost primitive. But Bernstein says what Beethoven does with those ideas, that's where the magic is. And we know, because we have these manuscripts, how Beethoven literally suffered over every note. I mean, it's not like Mozart, who would just write straight from his head to the paper and it was all there. Although some people say maybe he destroyed his drafts, but that's another talk for another day. But Beethoven, his drafts are a mess. He had very sloppy handwriting. He would cross things out, rewrite things. We have candle wax stains, cheap wine stains on his papers, even his own tear stains. That's what it was for him. It was a struggle. One significant detail about this composition, this violin concerto, is Beethoven wrote it at a time when he was accepting the fact that he was losing his hearing. And I think that's the fundamental thing that people missed at the first performance, because what they heard was a very meditative piece that's quite long. It's for Beethoven. It's pretty meditative. And I don't know if they got it, but to me it's meditative on the surface and there's a volcano underneath. Because this, to me, is a piece about acceptance, and we can all relate to that. There's things in life that we don't want, but we must accept and somehow move on. And I think that's what's so deeply inspiring about Beethoven, is that there's that philosophical acceptance. He talks about it in a document. It's a letter he wrote to his brothers called the Heilige Stadt Testimony, where he describes what it was like to lose his hearing, especially for a great musician like him. Describes how it led him for the rest of his life to be pretty isolated and lonely and alone in the world. And it's really, it will tear your heart out. I recommend to read it. And it speaks to us today, I think. Finally, I want to say this. I had a professor who would always say this thing, and I didn't quite get it at the time, but I think I'm starting to get it, that he said, Beethoven is Tolstoy in music. I said, what do you mean? And he talked about the idea that a lot of art is pretty or beautiful, but not all art is like Beethoven and Tolstoy. It goes beyond just beauty into the realm of morality, ethics, compassion, those things, And here's a thing from Tolstoy from his essay, What is Art? He describes the backstage of an opera theater. And he says, what's all this fuss about? Why do we even bother with the arts when there's genuine suffering in the world? I think about that a lot. That's a valid point. And then he concludes by saying, If one person, even just one, walks away from a painting exhibition or a play or a concert with a little more sensitivity in their heart, a little more compassion in their heart, then it's done its job. That's Tolstoy. And I think Beethoven is like that. Ironically, in that same essay, Tolstoy trashes Beethoven, but that's the whole, these people hated each other, and that's just part of what it is. But there is this connection, I think. I really think so. So anyway, I'm going to do the first movement of Beethoven's Violin Concerto, Beethoven's own arrangement for piano. first movement. But I'm shy to play the entire thing in one sitting, I just don't. But at any rate, that's the violin concerto, Beethoven's own arrangement for piano. I threw in some of the orchestra. And one little detail about this that's very interesting, and my violinist friends probably justifiably get kind of annoyed with me. They say, "What are you doing? Why are you playing our repertoire?" One even told me, "Who on earth could possibly conceive of doing such a vulgar, profane arrangement of Beethoven's violin concerto?" I said, "Beethoven did it." Okay, well, but here's the thing and the question of what's the pure and authentic version. Okay, here's a curious detail. A cadenza is a space for improvisation in a concerto. Beethoven was maybe the first to actually write out his cadenzas because he was a great improviser, but on the other hand, he really wanted to put on paper what he wanted to say. So Beethoven wrote cadenzas for the majority of his concertos. He did not for the violin concerto. He did not write cadenzas. If you go to hear this with the symphony of violinists, they're probably going to play the Fritz Kreisler cadenza, which is fantastic. But it's not Beethoven. But the funny thing is, he did write cadenzas, Beethoven wrote cadenzas for the piano version. I played it 3/4 of the way towards the end. It's that part that's completely bonkers. Because he does another thing. A cadenza is usually for the solo instrument. For some reason, Beethoven includes timpani. So that's why I was trying to imitate the timpani and doing all this, whacking the key, because that's what the timpani's doing. So it's really interesting. And some violinists, there's one German violinist, Christian Tetzlaff, who came to the conclusion that this is a real problem. The violin concerto does not have an authentic Beethoven written cadenza. So he took the piano cadenza and adapted it for violin in a sort of reverse arrangement. So it gets all really confusing. And these are the things I tell myself to justify this crazy thing I'm doing, which is I'm playing violin repertoire on the piano, but I think there's some justification for it when you think about it. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent too much. So some short pieces right now. And this I want to dedicate to a Greensboro native. I don't know if she's here today, but she was here at some of my things in Greensboro recently. So this is Maurice Ravel. I don't think I've played this for you yet. I hope not. I'm trying to keep things fresh. This is Pièce en forme de habanera, piece in the style of a habanera. Habanera is not only a tasty pepper, it's a dance. It's originally a Cuban dance from Havana, and it has this rhythm, this lovely lilting da. Bum, 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 dee, da, da, da. If you like Carmen by Bizet, there's a famous habanera, which I won't even attempt to try to sing, but heard it. Yeah, da, dee, da, 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 da. I sang, sorry. So, but this dance was all the rage in Europe at the time, and Ravel, being a sort of impressionist composer, this is his take on a habanera. Ravel was controversial at the time, just like Debussy. People, Fauré, for example. I played Fauré here in the past. Fauré was one of Ravel's teachers. And Ravel wrote the wonderful string quartet as a gift for Fauré. You know what Fauré said? He said, from the first note to the last note, an utter, miserable, complete failure. Very encouraging. They said the same thing about the Impressionist painters. They would say, what's the matter with these guys? They need glasses, That's kind of like Impression. So, but it's only later after the fact. It's kind of like the Beethoven. It's after the fact we start. It's kind of a sad thing. But that's the Ravel. Now, this is an arrangement, of course, and the original, I think I did play this at Guilford, so sorry, but I just remembered. But this is it's worth playing, and it's a nice contrast to Beethoven. This is arranged for piano by Daniel Héricourt. Does that name ring a bell for anybody?
Yeah.
I'm sure it does, yep, it does, because Daniel Héricourt was born in France in 1903, I think it was. He knew Debussy, he knew Ravel, he was fantastic pianist, composer, all of that. He ended up in North Carolina. He taught at UNC Greensboro for years. And I hadn't known that. I was playing over at Whitestone, and when I just learned it a few months ago, this piece, and I mentioned the name. I didn't know that Héricourt had anything to do with Greensboro. And this lady comes to me and says, I was their neighbor for Years. I said, you gotta be kidding me. And I looked them up. Well, long story short, I had this whole saga over the summer. Someone said, I know Jane. Jane is his wife, his widow, who's quite active, pianist, composer, everything. She's amazing. Quite the resume, my goodness. And they said, give me your phone number, I'll get it to Jane. And this was months and months ago, and time passed and passed and passed. And I was at the Walmart on a line that was not ending, and I was really flustered, and I had to go. It was raining outside. It was just one of those days. And I get this phone call from a Greensboro number. This is like a month and a half ago. And I thought, oh, it's probably a scam, I picked it up, and this voice says, Robert? I said, yes. I couldn't believe it. She said, this is Jane Ericourt, and I would like to meet you. I couldn't find the word. I mean, imagine you were at Walmart and you were upset and you get a call and it's, this is Robert Schumann, or this is Clara Schumann, or this is Brahms. I'd like to meet you. Can you? Yeah. So I was so stupid I couldn't form a sentence. I said, do you have my phone number? That was the first impression. But I hope she forgave it, and I got to meet her and hear all these stories. She would say, here's a photo. It's my husband and I, Daniel, with our good friend. I don't know if you've heard of Andreas Segovia. Goodness, he was a good cook, And all these stories. She said, Daniel Ericourt had a crush on Debussy's daughter, and he would go to Debussy's house to see the daughter. And sometimes his daughter, her name was Shushu. Sometimes Shushu wasn't home. So Daniel Ericourt frustratedly just sat and listened to Debussy talk, and he didn't want to be there. But then he realized so many years later, oh my goodness, I was in the room. So it's just interesting, and it's local. The Ericourts are local, and I think it just goes to show that you could be from France, you could be from wherever, but North Carolina is pretty darn good. So here is Daniel Ericourt's arrangement of Ravel's Pièce en forme de habanero, and I dedicated to Jane, and she gave me some of her husband's scores, beautiful pieces. I look forward to learning them, but I wish I could learn faster. I'm a slow learner, so this brain only works so fast. promised short pieces after the Beethoven. Short dessert piece. Well, they're not really dessert, but it's like a concert to me is like a meal because that's my real passion is eating. So, you know, you have your roast beef and potatoes, those first, but then you have to have other things and it completes the meal. Favorite violinist of mine who I knew, Aaron Rosan, he taught at Curtis, was a genius, oh my goodness. He was always criticizing people's programming. He said, you know, and I do his impression of his voice pretty decently. He would say, the young people these days, they'll play 3 Brahms sonatas on a concert. I'll fall asleep, it's terrible. To play short pieces, what he said. Okay, so here's a short piece. This is the melody in E flat. Souvenir d'un lieu cher. It's called a Remembrance of a Beloved Place, I think is what it means, by Tchaikovsky. And he wanted to include this in his violin concerto, also in D major, modeled after the Beethoven, but he didn't. He didn't think it was good enough. I'm making a Russian pun, sorry, you know, Boris good enough. It's called a dad joke, I'm sorry, it's very bad. Yeah, so, I don't know, but it's a standalone violin piece. This is, of course, a piano version. Tchaikovsky, oddly enough, was not, his peers did not consider him Russian enough, whatever that means. You know, Borodin, Mussorgsky, those guys more consciously used folk music in their compositions. Well, Tchaikovsky did that. He didn't do it quite as much. He has maybe a little more in common with someone like Massenet or someone French, you know, maybe. And he loved Mozart too very much. But here's something I think about with Russian music. My mother's from Russia, my uncle, who we lost about a year ago. They would always tell me, listen to Russian melodies, they go on and on and on. You know, you have, no, that's not it. Rachmaninoff, right? And the question is, when does it really take a break? It doesn't. That's the tune, it just goes on and on. Like somebody who tells a story that doesn't end, you know. Russians can do that, I've noticed. Yeah, and that's the thing I made the connection with my Russian heritage. And my dad, who's from Southern Virginia, going back generations, I was 4 years old, we went to a family gathering. I don't remember this, and apparently I told my mother afterwards, I said, Mom, Dad's not crazy. Everybody else here tells stories that never end. So the Russians and the Southerners, they're not too different. So here's Tchaikovsky. think I have till about 5 or so, is that right? I don't know, when does dinner, okay, I don't want to make anybody late for eating. But if I go over a little over 5, is that okay? Just like a few minutes. Try to keep it. Anyway, so now I'm going to play maybe 2 more short classical pieces, then maybe 1 gospel, looking at the time. This is Fritz Kreisler, Viennese Caprice. I've done various Kreisler things. This is something pretty new for me. It's an early piece of Kreisler's, and it's a tribute to Vienna, his hometown, his home city. It's sort of a lullaby-ish waltz, you could say, because everything's got the waltz in it for Kreisler. You don't get more Viennese than Fritz Kreisler and Wiener Schnitzel and Johann Strauss Jr., the Blue Danube. I think that's Vienna. At the same time, Vienna is one, I think it was a historian said that, well, this is okay. What's the difference between Vienna and, say, Berlin, culturally? I read this joke. There was a joke in the 19th century. They said, in Berlin, things are very serious, but there's hope. In Vienna, things are not so serious, but there's no hope. And to me, that explains, the music of, well, for example, Beethoven or Schumann. They were German. Their music's very serious, but to me, Beethoven, there's a lot of optimism in there. Schubert, who I adore so much, but Schubert always has this kind of lightness to him, and he has a smile on his face but underneath it's just black with despair. Mahler is like that too. Mahler, and Kreisler is too. So Vienna in the 20th century, someone said they waltzed, with their love of the waltz, they waltzed right off a cliff. Yeah, I mean, between the First and Second World Wars, and they descended into fascism, into anti-Semitism, into extremism. And Kreisler, who was Jewish, luckily got out. So many didn't. And how disgusting is it that the culture that he so embodied just rejected him in this ugly way? It makes me think a lot. But at any rate, he came to this country, had a great time. He always would sit in Central Park and smile and talk to people. He was that kind of guy. Not all classical people are like that. Beethoven wasn't. He had this great quote. He said, "I don't go perform concerts." He said, "I just go to see my friends." That's it. I love that about him. I've probably told you this story, but I should tell you. It's just that he was friends with Rachmaninoff, and they played together. They were doing a concert in Carnegie Hall. Kreisler never practiced. He just didn't like it. I don't think he needed to. He was playing so beautiful. And in that time, they didn't care so much about wrong notes. I kind of like it. They're more, nowadays we're very, uptight about that. And he messed up. And Rachmaninoff's playing. Rachmaninoff was a very dour man. He was very serious, tall, shaved head. Someone said he looked like an escaped convict, So he's playing, and Kreisler walks over and whispers to him, "Where are we?" And Rachmaninoff, without even cracking a smile, he just said, "Carnegie Hall." I love that story. So here's the Viennese Caprice, Caprice Viennois by Fritz Kreisler. You'll hear his little humor there. It's not little, there's a lot of humor. Tongue in cheek. I'll close with a piece with some fireworks. This is a piece I never imagined I would learn. It's by Cuban composer Ernesto Lecuona, Malagueña. Famous, famous, famous piece. That's part of why I never thought I'd do it. Another is my teacher, Solomon Mikovsky, who was from Cuba. Lost him a few months ago, sadly. He would frequently tell me, and I do his accent very well. He didn't think so, but I do. He would tell me, he would say, Robert, you know, how can you play this music? You don't even come from Cuba. How can you understand it? You know, and or Spain, because the piece is really Spanish. Malagueña means a woman from Malaga, and Malaga is this great center of flamenco music. You know, so it's a flamenco piece, and it doesn't have much to do with the violin. This is the only piano piece I'm actually playing today. It is for piano, but there is a violin version. There's an everything version of it. There's a guitar version, voice, everything. So it's and I learned it out of guilt. There's a nice lady in Raleigh at a place I play. Every time I'd go there, she'd ask me to learn it, and I wouldn't. And then after about a year, I felt very bad. I usually don't do requests, but I learned it out of guilt. So I still don't feel like I quite get the style. My teacher's words haunt me, because it's true, I'm not from Cuba or Spain, as he said. So I'll do my best. is it okay if I do a quick gospel real quick? Okay, good. Just to close. I promise this will be it. I'm gonna do When They Ring Those Golden Bells in 2 different styles. One in the style of Tennessee Ernie Ford, more straightforward, and then go into a sort of New Orleans, that style. Actually, the style you might hear at a Pentecostal church or something, So I'll do that, and then we will close. So thank you all very much for being here. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Have a lovely evening. Sorry I overstayed a little bit. Have a great dinner and take care.
You can find out how it's called the Heiligenstadt testimony. But if you can send me an email, I'll send it to you. Oh, it's easy. Just my name. Robert Buxton.
Did you look out to do it?
Yeah, there were several choices.
Just like the Outer Banks.
Kind of like
Buster.
start.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
I never heard that.
I hope so. Oh, I began late. Somewhat late. Yes, I did. I was terrible.
I know you were. It's very, very red. Like the sand.
Okay.
It's red.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, good to see you again. How are you? Yeah, we
Yeah, she said.
yeah, the dinner.
Good to see a sheet of music.
Or Henry.
It's great.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks for having me.
the last time I was here, you did a list.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
I heard
Yes, and I
teacher told me about this. She said,
Daniel and James played together.
She's doing great. I saw her the other day.
And you know, I think she's from Little Rock,
yeah.
She is.
Eastern North Carolina.
I lived there for a time.
Oh, we
I saw
Oh,
the
you
family in the
did?
office, and I said,
Oh,
man,
yes,
that's really good family
yeah.
there.
Oh, really?
Okay, Greenville.
I'm Ellie Leonard.
Are you from down?
No, I work here.
Okay.
And I played about it when you still had the music, but not like you.
Oh, it's a great
But
grade.
I
A year and a half. Are you
had,
in the apartments or in villas or? How about you? Oh, we're not trying to get close. We hear things about the school. Yes, I'm so glad I'm having you on the house. But can you hear me? Are you from Greensboro?
My teacher too.
And years ago.
and she did not like it.
No, no, no. Well, I did talk to a Canadian girl
Thank you
and
for
said you got a
coming.
spot.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Well, I'm a native, I never got out.
Very, very nice.
Watch out.
Yes.
Yeah. You wait 6 months or
Hope you're doing well.
I have a relative.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, if you like it, just give a good report. That helps for you. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll see you.
I made sure I did that too.
He's
Thank
great.
you. Good to be here.
Let me turn your.
Thank you very much.
Just with the button. I think he wants that off. Sure.